Welcome, everyone. My name is Eric Richards. I'm a faculty member here at BTI, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you all for this celebration of the BTI Centennial Oral History Project. And I'm going to say a few words at the outset to explain the project and a little bit about the process and how it came together. And I'm going to introduce and thank the many people that were involved in putting this all together. And this has been a 2.5-year project, and it's involved many people. I went back and I looked at the original objective to the project as it was written in a proposal that Georgia Lesh and I put together in December of 2021. And the objective was to capture firsthand accounts of BTI's history, BTI's institutional directions, and the fabric that made BTI in different areas over the years. As you'll see, we've gone back about 60 years, actually 64 years in our history of our 100 years. But we wanted to capture that through the direct personal experience and remembrances of alumni. And what was important here is to try to get diverse perspectives. So certainly we have perspectives from scientists, faculty members, people who worked on the scientific staff. We also were able to capture perspectives from trainees and people who worked in administration, people who worked in leadership. And you'll see all of that come together in what we'll show you today. Now, a big shout out to BTI. We had an internal competition that funded this, a so-called Strategic Initiatives Plan, but the money was supported ultimately from the Triad Foundation. And we are extremely grateful and continually grateful to the Triad Foundation for all that they have done and continue to do for the Institute. Now, once we got funding, we pulled together people internally. So we had a group, the working group that we would meet bi-weekly, and these are the folks that were involved. And so Georgia and I co-led this group, and lots of discussion and communication over time on all the logistics of it. But here are the kind of the heroes of this, the people who were interviewed. We had 10 interviewees. Many of them are here. And so this is a nice graphic that Paula put together that shows you the span of time that the various folks have been here. Yes, you're looking at the little pop-up, yes. In the audience now, Luke Colavido is here in the back, and John Dentes, Bob Kohut, Ben Williams, Dan Klesick, and hopefully online, Rob Last, who will be here next week, as it turns out. I believe he's going to join us, so I hope you're hearing this and seeing this, Rob, and as well as Zohara. Who is joining us from Israel. So many of these interviews happened here in Ithaca, but 2 of them happened in New York City, and one of them happened virtually in Israel with Zohara. You can see the roles that the various people have played over time, and you'll get a flavor of that when we show you the highlight clip. So thank you all. And the products here, we did 10 interviews, roughly an hour, 40 to 60 minutes. And there are transcripts that were produced that correspond to the interviews. And those will be accessible via the BTI website, but they're not posted yet. So we're hoping to get those up in a week or so with the transcripts. So you'll be able to see those. But what we're going to see shortly is a 20-minute video highlight, which has little excerpts that we put together that are based on certain themes. And one theme is, how did you get to BTI? And it's fun to see all the different paths that brought people to BTI. And then there's some more content that are on specific things. Okay. Now, I talked a little bit at the beginning about the goal. We're certainly celebrating our 100th birthday, but we're thinking about the future. And you know, like our time capsule burial, we're thinking about like where we're headed. And there's a larger project going on to save archival materials in terms of papers and books and correspondence and lots of photographs that we have. And we're trying to save that for our future, as well as historians that may be interested in our institutional development. Okay, so I've kind of left off the most important team, not just the interviewees, but the folks who actually did the interviewing. There's a team of two folks that we are deeply grateful for. One is Christopher Knight, who is a videographer and worked closely with Agnes Niemark, who's here with us. And Agnes is an oral historian and a researcher. She's a scholar. And I hope you don't mind, I tried to take a little bit from your signature to kind of get an idea of all the things that you're doing as a scholar. Agnes has been working in nuclear disarmament and the history of nuclear disarmament. And one of the big tools she uses is oral history. And she has an appointment here at Cornell as well as in Barcelona. So before we show the video, I'd like to invite Agnes to say a few words. And while she's coming down, I just want to let you know kind of where we're headed from here. After we see the video, we'll open it up to questions. So everything's open, and I hope that the interviewees will field questions that may come from the audience. And if we're good, I'd like to introduce Agnes Niemark. Thank you so much.
Hello. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm very happy to see some familiar faces of my interviewees. I'm happy to see you here. I would like to say thank you to the Boyce Thompson Institute for giving me the opportunity to work on this project. It was much more than I expected. So as Eric said at the beginning, the project was introduced as the project of oral history, presenting the history of this institution, the last 100 years. But in fact, it was really an extensive journey through space and time. And I enjoy discovering different stages of science in plant research. And I enjoy moving between not only Ithaca or the Yonkers when the Institute was placed at the beginning, but through the stories of my interviewees, going to the Arcadia National Park in Maine, and going to Alaska and also California and Texas, because research was done in so many different places. So it was really a fascinating journey through different places and stories of my interviewees. So I hope you enjoyed the selective videos that were prepared for today. And if you wish to discuss any details, I will be happy to discuss that later. Thank you so much. I'm Agnieszka Niemark, and this is the Boyce Thompson Institute Centennial Oral History Project. My interviewee today is Ben Williams, Alan Renwick, Bob Kohut, Claire Castile, Daniel Klesik, John Dentis, Laura Phillips, Luke Colavito, Robert Last, Zohara Yaniv Bahrach. Thank you so much for taking part in this project.
Alan Renwick, presently an emeritus faculty member at BTI, first connected with the Institute in 1960 after finding contributions from the Boyce Thompson Institute the House Journal published by the Institute at his technical college in Scotland.
Now, the place where I worked was the Horticultural Research Institute, and there I found the contributions of the Boyce Thompson Institute. I looked at the Boyce Thompson Institute and wrote a letter, not knowing who it would go to, saying that I was interested in finding a job and maybe an opportunity to go to graduate school. And to my surprise, a week later, I got a letter from the managing director, George McNew. And he said, well, it sounds like you've got an interesting background. Why don't you give us a call when you get to New York, and we'll talk about it. So I made all my arrangements, and I took all my worldly belongings in a trunk, which I took on the plane. In those days, it was an old prop plane. It took 11 hours to cross the Atlantic. And on Monday morning, I got up and called Boyce Thompson. We talked for about an hour, and they said, well, it sounds as if you're qualified. We'll offer you a job. And I said, fine, when do you want me to start? He said, how about tomorrow?
Luke Colavito arrived at BTI in 1963 and retired from the Institute in 1990. He talks about how he ended up at the Institute.
I went up to the New York State Employment Agency in White Plains, New York, and they were kind of unsure about how to find a job for me. And I suggested, why don't you call the New York Botanical Gardens? And they suggested this place called Boyce Thompson Institute. I had never heard of it. And I worked for Walter Tulecki. He was a specialist in sort of a new part of science, plant tissue culture. And my job was to maintain the cell lines and perform whatever experiments were needed, calling for these different plant tissue cultures.
Ben Williams was the first BTI Director of Public Affairs and worked at BTI between 1984 and 1994. Ben explains why he was chosen by BTI's managing director in the early 1980s, Roy Young, for the job.
I had worked at the university for a number of years and was familiar with the operation. Part of my work was in fundraising, which was important, in fact, perhaps critical to Boyce Thompson at that time. Or maybe he thought I could be more of an advisor, a guide, helping to bridge the gap and bring Boyce Thompson more prominently into life in the community.
Bob Kohut, current emeritus faculty member, was a scientist at BTI from 1980 until he retired in 2004. He talks about how his friend John Lawrence recruited him to BTI from an environmental consulting firm in Colorado.
I'm out there in Colorado one day and the phone rings. And I answer the phone and it's my buddy John. And he says to me, the Institute is going to start a new research program. It's going to be funded by the EPA, and it's going to look at the response of agricultural crops to controlled levels of ozone in the field. Are you interested? Yeah, I'm interested, man. I came to Ithaca. I interviewed with Len Weinstein, and I got a job offer.
Zohara Yaniv Bakrak conducted research at BTI from 1967 until the Institute moved to Ithaca in 1978. She talks about how she was recruited to BTI by Dick Staples.
Well, he did offer me to be a postdoc in his laboratory, and I accepted it. So I was pregnant at that time, so I said it will be only fair if I tell him in advance that within few months I will have to be away for a short time. And he told it to Professor McNew, who was the head of the institute. He said, wow, I am afraid that you did a mistake. You're losing your postdoc. She will not come back. How can she? Her first pregnancy and her first baby. So Dick told me, and I said, don't worry, everything will be okay. So when I came back to the institute, Dr. McNew was full of happiness. He was so happy to see me coming back.
Dan Klessig arrived at BTI in 2000. He talks about how he was recruited from Rutgers University's Waxman Institute.
When Ralph Harding was president, he asked Charlie Arntzen to do a review of BTI, and Charlie asked Joanne Curry and myself to help him with that review. I was going more and more into plants, so I said, this is a much better place to do plant research than Rutgers, even though Rutgers was now coming along. So I asked Charlie, could I come as a senior scientist? And he was quite excited about it, but realized there weren't any openings. But I guess within a year or two, maybe 2 years, he approached me again and said, Dan, I'm going to step down at the end of my 5-year term. Would you consider applying for the presidency? And Greg Martin also asked me to consider it. We met at a meeting, or he approached me at a meeting in Europe. And so I threw my hat in the ring, and that's how I became the president.
John Dentes, BTI's chief financial officer from 1982 to 2010, describes how being hired at BTI was like coming home.
Coming to BTI, or going to BTI, was like coming home. I was born and raised in Ithaca, then Cornell University College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. I took another year and I got my MBA. I earned my MBA from what was then called the School of Business and Public Administration, now the Johnson School. In many, many ways, it was a perfect setup for Boyce Thompson. So we're running 90 to 100 mini projects, and that's pure job shop accounting with a not-for-profit spin, and throw in a layer of government accountability, and you have Boyce Thompson, and you have something that was a lot of fun to work on.
Robert Last, former BTI faculty member and currently University Distinguished Professor at Michigan State University, discusses his path to BTI.
Met up with Ralph Hardy. I'm sure I met Ralph during the interview, but I remember quite well meeting up with Ralph. He was in Cambridge, Mass, for a business meeting, and we had breakfast together at his hotel in Harvard Square. Remember this very well. There are some moments in one's life that one remembers quite well, and we had a really great conversation about his vision and the Institute's vision for continuing to grow and expand in molecular biology across the Institute.
Claire Castile, a postdoctoral researcher in the Jander Lab from 2010 to 2014 and currently associate professor at Cornell, describes her path to the Jander Lab.
When I went out and interviewed at Boyce Thompson Institute, I was just really excited about the experience. I didn't know much about these research institutes, but I knew about a few of them, like the Danforth Center and the Nobel Foundation and Boyce Thompson Institute. But Boyce Thompson Institute seemed a little different because it was right in the campus of Cornell. And so on my interview, I met not only lots of the scientists at BTI, but also some people from Cornell. It just seemed like people were excited and they're very happy. And I felt like I could be very happy and excited there too.
Laura Phillips served on the BTI Board of Directors between 2006 and 2018. She was the co-vice chair of the board 2009 to 2013 and the chair of the board 2014 to 2018. She recalls how she joined the board.
I knew of BTI, but I didn't really know very much about it. Then Ezra Cornell had been a longtime friend and contact. He approached me and said there might be an opportunity that was a good match for me at BTI. And the caliber of research at BTI was incredibly impressive. So I became interested and I accepted the opportunity.
Alan Renwick discusses the social life at the Institute during the 1960s and 1970s when BTI was located in Yonkers.
The Institute had a lady who came in to cook lunches for us. And she saw me and said, I was pretty skinny at that time, said, you need fattening up. So she would give me extra servings. We had a volleyball court outside the Institute, so we played there at lunchtime. Some of us went on ski trips. We went to the World's Fair in New York in 1964, I think that was. I got to know people, and I got together with other bachelors, and we actually rented houses together. And some of these people became my best friends, and still are, in fact.
Luke Colavito talks about the housing situation when BTI was located in Yonkers.
The Institute had bought up all the land around it. There was one home that nobody seemed to want. It was on the golf course, on the edge of the golf course, but it had been used to clean a lot of equipment, and they had a solvent that really ranked. It smelled terrible, and nobody wanted it. But didn't bother us. And luckily, they did take the tank away, and we got this wonderful home. I was only like about a 10-minute walk from the Institute, and I would cut across the grounds of the golf course, and it had snowed. And I really didn't know my way too well, and I fell in a sand trap up to my waist in snow. I thought, this is a funny place to die.
Ben Williams explains the public relations aspect of his position and how he tried to raise the profile of the Institute and help integrate it into the local community.
Helped build the reputation of the Institute. It carried on some very sophisticated plant research, but it was not well known. We did that through working with the Cornell News Bureau, where we would have press releases about major scientific developments that took place at Boyce Thompson. And the other part of it was bringing Boyce Thompson into not only the Cornell community, but also the Ithaca community, and making it a vital part of the overall community picture.
Zohara Yaniv Bachrach discusses studying protein synthesis of the Eurytospore of bean rust with Dick Staples.
What happens to the parasite if it only lands on water? What stops the biochemistry of it? Does it have a protein synthesis like a normal plant, or it's a different one? And we did find that it's a different protein synthesis and a different DNA synthesis, and we were able to isolate few key enzymes and to show the dependency of this parasite and how the surface of the leaf triggers the germination of the spore, and so that the spore, which is like the seed of the rust fungus, the spore can germinate and can begin its penetration into the leaf, and therefore the whole biochemistry is aimed to be successful on this process.
John Dentes recounts how the close relationship between Managing Director Roy Young and eventual board member Roy Park Sr. helped mobilize members in the local business community, along with Dean Charles Palm at Cornell, to lobby officials in the New York State government to facilitate BTI's move to the Cornell campus rather than to Oregon State University.
The names that come to mind are David Cutting, a local automobile dealership owner, Ray Van Hout, the president of the Tompkins County Trust Company, and Tony DiGiacomo, and also Dean Palm. Those four individuals, by the way, were instrumental in flying to Albany on a very snowy winter evening to convince Governor Malcolm Wilson of the desirability of keeping Boyce Thompson in New York State, not moving to Oregon, and building a building and enticing Boyce Thompson to stay.
Rob Last discusses synergies between the Institute's traditional strength in environmental biology and his new lab studying plant molecular biology in the early 1990s.
It was a really good synergy, set of possibilities between some of the organismal physiologists, folks who are interested in what happens to a tree when it's out in acid rain or in a sulfur dioxide rich environment. But my interests were in these little tiny plants, not in great big plants, but they're really great synergy. So for example, Bob Amundsen, who was a staff scientist, I guess, or a faculty member at the time in environmental biology, and his group with Rich Reba, and my group, Jiayang Li, and originally Jiayang Li and others in my group, established a collaboration really quite informally, which led to some really, some of my most highly cited papers.
Claire Castile responds to a question about what aspect of her training at BTI she considered the most important.
In George's lab, it was the first time I really felt like an equal as a scientist, and like I deserve this place at the table. He respected me and made me feel like my opinions mattered, and I think that was a big deal. He would ask me to look at grants for him, and we worked on grants together. He also was really generous with his time and talking about science and ideas. That helped me generate and start to develop my own ideas.
Dan Klessig talks about the challenges he faced as a new president of the Institute.
The physical plant was quite good in many regards, but in some regards was not appropriate for some of the research. Research programs were now larger. Laboratories were little 2 or 3 man modules. We made them much larger so it could accommodate larger research groups. We increased the number of cold rooms and common equipment for doing biochemistry and molecular biology. And then we made a massive change in the growth chambers with the help of George Jander, who we had recruited. He had worked at Monsanto, and they were ending a program in the Boston area, and we were able to have them donate essentially several thousand square feet of growth chambers. So it dramatically increased our capacity.
Laura Phillips talks about the creation of the Scientific Advisory Board in 2014.
So we had world-class scientists who were very happy to come and be advisors to this crown jewel of an organization with world-class research going on. It was really a plus to be involved in an advisory capacity, a scientific advisory capacity. But many folks that are really terrific at that role, not so interested in being involved in a board. So these were really almost disparate parts that were trying to be into one organization. So we'd already bifurcated that as I came on the board, and we created this separate entity, which was now called the Scientific Advisory Board.
Bob Kohut discusses the history of the environmental biology group at BTI and the leadership of Leonard Weinstein.
Everybody worked on every other project. I mean, it was really interactive, and so it was a good group to be in. Leonard was the program director. He was a great guy. I mean, I've always felt beholden to Leonard. Unfortunately, he's passed away, but I always felt beholden to him as having given me the opportunity to come to the Institute, as well as John Lawrence for calling me that day and asked me if I was interested. So I feel really fortunate having had this opportunity to work at BTI. It's a great place. Environmental biology was a great place. And I feel that I've been really blessed having the opportunity to do the kinds of things I wanted to do as a kid, and knowing the people that I knew and was able to work with. I've been very fortunate.
Thank you so much for today. I hope the centennial celebration will be another occasion to meet people that you work with some time ago. And thank you so much for today.
I want to say a few words of thanks. In particular, the amount of work that went into making the edited video. Paula and Mike and AJ in particular did a lot of work to pull that together. So. And of course, Agnes and Chris for making the big product. Anyway, questions for Agnes or the interviewees or just in general?
How many bloopers are there?
We didn't see the bloopers. They got taken out, right?
Looking back, that you wish you had captured that's missing, or you think that you sort of milled over since that time? That you should have found a place for that.
For each interview, I usually hold at least 2 preparatory meetings with the interviewees, and we discuss at length, their connection to BTI, their story. So during this discussion, I sort of try to realize what would be the most interesting and what we should film as a story. I think it also helps to be a person from outside the institution, because as you know, in a place when we work, we have good memories and bad memories. Each of us has its own perspective on what is happening, what could be done differently at an institution. But as an outsider and a non-scientist, I think I looked more into personal stories and tried to tell the history of the institution through personal stories. So I think I'm quite happy with that. Eric might have different perspective. Maybe he discovers something through the interviews that, we share the interest in history of science in general, but we also, I think, love listen to stories of people. So I think Eric might have some things that maybe weren't captured because he knows the institution. But for me, I'm really happy with what we have done. Yeah.
So if I could respond maybe to both questions, first to Magda's question about bloopers. There are some outtakes. Yeah, right. But so after the interview was done, Chris and Agnes often asked kind of separate questions that weren't part of, because as Agnes just mentioned, like before the interview, like we would meet, develop a set of kind of general areas, and then there were 1 to 2 pre-interviews, and so there were topics that were kind of outside of the plan that were asked, and we have those as well, which are part of what we'll have for the future. Now the question about the things that surprised me, I was fascinated by almost every interview, kind of learning new things about my colleagues that I didn't know. I mean, the story of Alan, the part of it that you didn't quite hear because we had to cut it down, he talks about coming, whatever, his DC-3 across the, Atlantic. And he said, I spent 2 nights at the YMCA and I called on the phone and they told me how to take a train to Yonkers. Right. And he just came without like a safety net, basically. He said, like, I had everything in this trunk. And apparently the 2 scientists that picked him up had a VW Beetle. And he's like, how am I going to put this trunk in the Beetle? So these kind of stories were awesome. I think the other thing, I learned about were different parts of the Institute, the field sites, the work that was done kind of outside of the way we typically think now of, okay, that happened at Yonkers, that happens here in a laboratory, but how much of the science was done, out in the wild and out in field sites and like the Hudson Valley Estuary Project, things like that I wasn't aware of, so I learned a lot. Yes.
To answer Mindy's question, I mean, one of the things that was tough was to narrow it down to 10 people. Because we had a pretty long, there's other folks, this is kind of like 1.0, right? I mean, there's other ones that we also want to do. It was really difficult to have to exclude some people because we only could afford to do 10 of them for this and had enough time to do 10. So part of it was a little bit of a bummer. There's so many other stories that we want to hear about, and we're just going to have to get those ones later. That was hard.
And can I also say, just in terms of process, the interviews took place over essentially a year and a half, right? So each one, there was at least kind of a month that was devoted to one interview. So there was a lot involved. I will tell you, to Paul's point about kind of maybe 1.0, there's actually a 0.8 somewhere. That is, we have video tapes of an oral history project that was done in 2002. Some of you might have been on that one as well. And I didn't know about it. And it was when we were going through the archives, we ran across these. Well, actually, the permission slips, right? People had signed this thing to this oral history. And for like 6 months, we had pieces of paper that said, oh, there was an oral history project. We couldn't find it. Downstairs in the basement, we opened a cardboard box one day and there's a videotape. So we have like an earlier version of an oral history project that we want to bring to life. And we've also talked about a 2.0, and we have a studio, some of you may know, downstairs that's being developed, and thought that it depends on how the community feels about this, but I think that doing a maybe more self-directed recording of the people who are here in our centennial year would be a great thing to do. So we should talk about that. Bob, please.
I would just like to say that it was a lot of fun to do. I've been sort of introspecting on my life, and this fit right into that little piece of work that I've been doing. And I just like to say that one of the things that became very obvious to me is that many of the most significant things happened in my life happened just like that. Or you didn't realize, I didn't realize at the time how important that decision or turning point was going to be in the future. And just like I said there, I got a call from my buddy John Lawrence. I had known John a long time. He and I started at Penn State. He was an undergrad, grad student, a teaching assistant in the class that John was in. And for some reason, got to know him pretty well. And our life paths separated, came back together again when he was a graduate student at the University of Minnesota, and I was on a postdoc at the university. And then he went down to BPI, downstate. I went to Colorado. I mean, but our lives just kept coming back together again until finally ended up here. But it was really important and useful time for me to think about my entire career and career institute. Being able to do things that I probably never would have done before. Worked on a project in Alaska, worked at National Park on a research project. I mean, really great stuff that when I was 13, 14 years old, I was thinking, oh, man, things like that. Sometimes your dreams do come true. And this is one of them.
Well, you summed up what we like as scientists, to be able to do the things that we want to do and have fun with it. It's a blessing can I ask a question that's related to this to you, Agnes? Not to put you too much on the spot, but normally when you do oral history, you're probably talking to activists and physicists and so are all academics the same, or you're seeing plant biologists as maybe slightly a different beast?
In general, my field of nuclear weapons and nuclear disarmament, it's a different field of studies. Is I would say more pessimistic in general when I talk to people, because it's really difficult to find a solution to get rid of nuclear weapons. So talking to physicists and people who are organizers or activists in my field, it's a little bit different. It's a lot of struggles that they describe, and they try to play an active role in this field to change things. So I must say that this was a very positive experience for me to talk about plants and what can be done in this field, and in relation of changing the human impact on environment, and improving research related to health through the plant research. So it was very interesting to me to see the discussion in the scientific world in this field. But it was also fascinating to listen to the personal stories of each of the interviewees. And I would like to encourage everyone to listen to the entire interviews, because as Bob said, they are these personal stories which first explain how people got into this field of studies and into this institute in particular. And there's a lot of things that happen by chance and coincidence, and it's not necessarily something that was planned, but just they have heard about this institute from someone, or maybe they knew someone who worked here. So this part of the interviews was very interesting to see the different stories. Then I really enjoyed to see different periods of time and how much the personalities of first managing directors, later presidents, influence also this institution, how the institution was run, and also the social aspect of working at BTI, first in Yonkers area in New York, and then in Ithaca. So I enjoy also seeing these personalities of the presidents and the style of running this institution, and also just to understand how the different programs were changing over time, depending on developments in general in environmental studies, in plant science in general, and slowly going into the discipline of molecular biology, becoming dominant as a research field here. So it was fascinating, and there was a lot of different aspects in the interviews that were quite interesting. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? All right, so I believe there's some food out there, and hopefully drinks and good conversations. So thank you all.